Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this Saturday, beautiful Saturday. Today, we are an hour earlier for a very special broadcast and a very special guest with us today, being interviewed by Peter Marks. I don't want to let the surprise out just yet, so let me bring Peter onto screen to introduce our very esteemed guest today. Super excited. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Christian. And hello, everyone. Hope you are well and staying safe out there. Yes, I am really excited to have a very special guest and a good friend of mine today. Her name is Fiona Morrison, and she is a fellow master wine. She actually passed in 1994. She beat me by 1 year. And as you can see on the screen there, she has written a book recently called The 10 Great Wine Families, A Tour Through Europe. And I'd like to bring Fiona on the screen and welcome you. Fiona, how are you?
I'm very well. It's really nice to be with you. Welcome to everybody in the States and all over.
And I should mention you're also the managing director of Niepoort Wine, which is an international negotiant and wine merchant. And you also, along with your husband, Jacques, help run 3 estates in Bordeaux, correct?
That's right. It's multitasking, but great.
Well, I actually got a copy of the book myself just the other day. I haven't had a chance to read all of it yet. I did read about your family, and I've read some other parts, but I'm really excited because it's just a great story, and I can tell that from your writing that you really enjoyed doing this book. And one of the things I wanted to mention is in the foreword. The foreword was written by Hugh Johnson, and he says, "This is the nearest anyone will get to unhurried and uninhibited visits to some of the world's most precious wine properties." And that's how I felt, I must say. It's a great book. But I want to know what inspired you to write this book?
I think that the principal reason was because so many people had asked me to write a book about the Niepoort family, about my family, and about the fairy story, which is Le Pin, rather very small mythical wine. And I really was against that. I didn't really want to write a book that was so concentrated on us. As Jacques, my husband, says, live hidden, live happy. So I didn't really want to sort of go into too much detail about that. And then a publisher said to me, please, would you do a book about great families? Because you know them all quite well. Who are your sort of 10 people that you would want to do? It's kind of a dream assignment, actually. And being an outsider to the business, coming in as the wife of, even though I've been in the wine business for a long time, I really share the inside and the outside business. I can look from the outside in, but now I can tell it from the inside as well. So that was the motivation in the beginning.
Could you briefly just name the 10 families you featured in the book, and why did you select them?
Well, at the beginning, I said I want to go worldwide. The publisher said, yeah, fine. And then he looked at the travel budget and realized that perhaps we should stay with Europe. So we have 3 from France. They wanted the Niepoort family, obviously, and then the Perrin family from Beaucastel. And then I wanted to write about Louis-Michel Ligier-Belair from Vaughan Romany, and for all that he's done at his estate there, which is incredible. From Spain, Torres and Palacios. From Portugal, Niepoort. From Italy, Gaja and Frescobaldi, for different reasons. Austria, we have the Emmerich Knoll family. And from Germany, we have Egon Müller. I think that's it. Yeah.
So it's definitely a who's who, isn't it? That's a great selection. And did you know?
That was the thing that I was slightly unsure at the beginning, because some of those families are so well known. People think, well, what else have we got to learn? So that was a real challenge for me.
And you knew most of them beforehand, correct?
I knew all of them except for Emmerich Knoll. I loved his wines. I loved their wines, and I'd heard a lot of great things about the family. But I spent 3 days there. There's father and son, and I love that shot. It's the end of the day. We're going towards the family chapel, and you can see the sort of reflections on the wall. I think it's just so evocative. And I spent 3 days with them in late August. And by the end, of course, you're part of a family.
Right. And you didn't just visit, you actually stayed with these families, correct?
I think that was probably the hardest part of a negotiation, was to actually say, I want to stay with you. And they said, no, you'll be much more comfortable in the hotel, surely. No, I want to stay in your house. Well, winemakers are quite shy sometimes about that sort of thing, but it was really important to do that, because those late night conversations with that last glass of port or grappa or whiskey or whatever can really dig out a lot and deal with a lot. And everyone did get the right to see the book at the end, because there was no need. It wasn't necessary to write something that was really damaging or too personal. But I did manage to dig pretty deep. And afterwards, when we had the book launch, they all looked at each other. They were all there in London when we did the book launch. And they sort of turned to each other and said, did you get a bit bruised? And, yeah, a bit. So they were very, very good. They trusted me, which was, very, very nice of them to do, and heartwarming for me.
Was there one thing that surprised you the most when you wrote this book after spending time with the families?
I think it's just how hardworking everyone is. I think sometimes the image of winemakers is that they are tasting wines all the time, or they're going around doing sort of fancy dinners or tastings. And we work hard as a family, but I realize that everyone else works so hard, and it's long days. And this drive to succeed, because what you're doing is going to be influencing not just the wine that you're making this year, but generations to come. And the photographer that I had with me was also like, my God, you guys never stop. And I think that people from the outside don't really realize. I mean, we love it. No one's complaining. It's just a fantastic business. But the hours you put in are enormous. And I'm sure, Peter, that some of your other guests, winemaker guests you've had, have probably talked about the long hours that it takes to make great wine.
Exactly. Also in the book, you point out that there's a saying that the first generation creates, the second generation profits, and the third generation sells. And is that a theme that you discovered among these families? Or is there a theme that you discovered among these families that allowed them to defy this belief?
Well, most of the families were fourth or fifth, apart from the Frescobaldi family, which my friend Lamberto Frescobaldi is the 30th generation. That's 30. But you're absolutely right. It often, by the time the family gets down to the third generation, there are usually a lot of them. And I have to put a sort of slight diversion here, in that Napoleon has an awful lot to answer for. He was the person who decreed that all land should be divided equally between heirs, rather than in Britain or in Germany or in other countries where there was right of primogeniture, the firstborn son inherited. In France, in the beginning of the 19th century, and then in most of the rest of Europe, all land is inherited equally between children. And good Catholic families, that means that you can get, rather like the Niepoort family, with our estate at Vieux-Château-Serton, where there are more than 49 first cousins in the third generation. You can imagine if you've got members of a family who are not in the wine business and maybe not that well off, when they look at, say, the price of land or the dividends that an estate has, they quite easily want out. And that causes great tension. When I was with Dirk Niepoort in Portugal, I had to take him up to the Douro. I had to insist that we go up to the Douro because the telephone signal up there is notoriously bad. And the reason I had to be up there was because he was on the phone all the time with his lawyers, because he was trying to work out the succession between him and his sister for the family. The anecdote to the end of that story was that year on Christmas Day, I got a message from Dirk saying, "Happy Christmas. My sister has just signed the agreement. This is going to be a great year ahead." So, I mean, there are solutions, but it takes a lot of diplomacy and a lot of patience, often to work out the inheritance. Harvard Law School runs a course on family businesses, not just wine businesses. And they estimate by the second generation, 50% of the businesses close. And by the third generation, as much as 78, only 12%, survive, 88%. And so it's much tougher than I think a lot of you out there can even imagine. And it's something you don't really talk about, but it just shows how you've got to make it work, and you've got to be the person in your generation to safeguard the business for the next generations to come.
You know, that's one of the things I've sort of gleaned from your book so far. There is a sense of mentoring the next generation. Was that consistent with everyone you met?
It's funny because some people do it well and some people don't do it at all. And one of the people who does it best of all, which was such a surprise to me, was Angelo Gaja. Now, Angelo is world famous, and he's kind of a pretty scary guy. He became, I remember going to one of the earlier tastings in New York that he did in the 80s. And I mean, he just mesmerized the whole of the room. I think it was the New York Wine Experience. And he's formidable. But he has been amazing about giving his two daughters, he's got a younger son, but first of all, the two daughters, control about how they make the wines and how they label the wines. Gaja, his eldest daughter, has very opinionated, has lots of very strong views about things. But she persuaded her father that they absolutely had to go back to using Barbaresco and Barolo names and not using other grape varieties in their blends. Whereas he, for a long time, had felt the Nebbiolo grape couldn't stand up on its own. And he says now, he just sent out a message to his friends. He turned 80 not very long ago, that it's the age of reason and how much he's proud of his children, his three children, but also he's quite surprised by himself how he managed to actually listen to his children and take their point of view on things.
Was there any particular family that was sort of hard to get to know?
There was quite a lot in the Torres family of PR. They're a very big family. They are very slick marketers. Miguel Torres Sr. has done so much, and he is probably the name that put modern Spain on the map to begin with. And one of the biggest stories was that, in fact, he said that he had great problems with his father, who wouldn't let go. And I felt there was quite a lot of tension between him and his son, Miguel, in the same sort of way. Probably a much nicer way, but still, there's quite a bit of tension now. Miguel Jr. is running the company, and Miguel Sr. is still very much there. And again, it took a walk in the vineyards. And for any of you, if you want to get to know winemakers, ask to get out into the vineyards and walk the vineyards with them. Because it took a walk in the vineyards up in Priorat for Miguel Jr. and I to really talk and to really bond, and some great stories to come out. And I think, especially in these lockdown days, being out in nature and being able to talk to people in their habitat and stopping and pausing to talk about a vine here and there is an incredible icebreaker. And it really did help, actually.
You know, on the other hand, was there a particular family that you just found so easy to sort of get to know and interact with?
I think the family that I was absolutely so impressed about was the Perrin family of Beaucastel. There's Francois, who is up on the picture, and then there is Jean-Pierre, his older brother. Two brothers who run the company. They have 9 children amongst them, of which only one is a girl. And what I think is absolutely incredible, 2 of the family are winemakers, but the other 7 all work in sales or marketing or strategy or finance. And one day, at the end of the day, Jean-Pierre took me up to their main office, which is not at Beaucastel, and up to the second floor. And there was this huge, great sort of loft space with 7 desks. Every one of those children who are not involved in wines, so it's Cesar and Mark who are more involved in wines, but the other 7 share the same office, have the same size desk, are paid the same amount of money, and work really closely together. It brought tears to my eyes. I thought that was just absolutely amazing. And if you look and see how Perrin as a family operate, from sort of a gorgeous homage to Jacques Perrin to their absolute amazing scoop with Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt with the Mirabelle Rosé, and Brad Pitt is still very much involved with Marc Perrin in that project. So it's an amazing family, and to see that that collaboration between the younger generation, which is the 4th generation, was just beautiful to see.
That's great. I want to mention the photographer of your book as well. Alexandra James has made some stunning photographs. Can you tell me how you connected with him and his part in producing the book?
I think anyone who's going to do a book of any kind that's got to have photos in it and is going to interview people, you have to do it with your photographer next to you. Alexander James is a best friend of my nephew who works in the family business with me, and he's based in Barcelona, and with a French mother, English father, lived all around the world, speaks many languages. And he came everywhere with me, and we had a sort of sign language between us about when I was sort of zooming into something in my interviews, he would pick up on it, and it could be a view from a window, it could be a glass, it could be just some interesting shots. There's quite a lot of kitchen shots because, of course, a lot of the conversations were held as we were all preparing dinner together in the evenings. And I think that it was amazing having that synergy. And some of the portraits, if you look at, for example, at the portrait of Egon Müller, who makes incredible Schwarzhof wines in the Moselle, and you look at that face, it's an incredible face of great intelligence, of great sensibility. But if you meet Egon for the first time, it's quite formidable too. And I love this portrait because it captures both those sides of this wonderful winemaker.
Beautiful, beautiful photos. I want to open it up to questions from the audience. But before we do that, I do have one personal question. Maybe you can help me sort of prove a theory that I have. And that theory that I have is that winemakers, well, you know how the theory about dog owners look like their dogs? Well, I have a theory that winemakers sort of look like the type of wines they make. That could be from physical attributes or personality-wise. Did you find the families that you met, either physically or personality-wise, sort of resonated with their own wines?
I think probably one of the best examples of that actually is Alvaro Palacios, who is just, I mean, he bounces just right out of the page. I mean, I've got so many stories, and I think that chapter has so many stories because he just makes me laugh, and yet as soon as I've finished laughing, he gets so serious. And it's sort of like his wines. They are so approachable and wonderful and glorious, and He loves, for example, the Grenache grape, Garnacha in Spain. And his wines seem so approachable, and yet there's so much seriousness and hard work and just sheer talent that is used to make those wines. And the way that he tends the vineyard is extraordinary. So, yes, I would say that he's probably the best example because his wines are quite approachable, but there are a lot of hidden depths.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Christian, let's turn over to you to see if we have any questions for Fiona.
Well, the first question, I think you piqued everyone's interest about the book. And the book is available through the Académie des Vins website. And make sure that you use the Napa 5 coupon code to save on the book. So that's one of the burning questions we have. And then we have, for the Perrin family, a question about which of the family members is going to be most likely to be responsible for the agricultural side of the operation?
Well, at the moment, it's Cesar, who's wonderful. He's got a dog called Mistral. He spends his whole time out in the vineyards, and he's mainly involved with the Beaucastel operations and all the Châteauneuf operations and the Gigondas operations. So I would say he's the most farmer of them all. And then Mark is the family member who looks more after the Miraval project and some of their other projects, and of course the California operation. And I think he is also very much, but I would say Cesar is more of a farmer of the whole family. But they're also approachable, and they all get together and have lunch together and work together. That in my visits there, I've spoken, I think, to all of them about wine, and they all get it and they know it, and they're pretty an amazing family.
So we have an interesting question here that I'll put up on screen as well. Do you think that women in the wine industry's daughters or daughters of winemakers will change something in the future of winemaking, or will they tend to keep the traditions of their fathers?
I think that's a really good question. One of the things about daughters, unfortunately, is that often they don't keep the family name. And that can be quite a challenge sometimes. When, just a little anecdote, when Angelo Gaja had his daughter, he called her Gaja, spelt with an I instead of a J, but still, Gaja. And I thought it was just the most egocentrical thing to do, until he said to me, well, of course, we wondered if we would only have one child, and we had to keep the Gaia name on. So that's just slightly an anecdote, but I think that women have sometimes more diplomacy and more patience, perhaps, and certainly prove themselves as winemakers. So I don't think there's any problem nowadays about women carrying on the next generation. The only challenge, or the only point, and I think that's why a lot of women winemakers do keep their maiden names, is carrying on the family name.
Great.
It reminds me of a story. I mean, Frescobaldi is one of the wineries that you covered, and this was probably 15 years ago when I visited the winery. But one of the things that I was struck by was as we walked through the cellars, and they had a little section for each of the different children, and they had wine from their birth year. And if it was a male, it was a pretty good stock of wine, and if it was a female, it was just a small little storage. Is that change? Have you noticed that the women are finally becoming a little bit more part of the family?
And I tell you, there's still some inequality, and he may kill me for saying this, but when I talked to Egon Müller, of course his son is called Egon, his father was called Egon, his grandfather was called Egon, the dog's called Egon, and I said, well, how are you going to make things equal for your daughter? And he said, oh well, we'll figure something out. But of course, he hadn't really, and his son Egon is very much going to be the heir. But of course, we are in the 21st century, and I think these days people have got to figure something out. But yeah, there is still, especially with the older generation, there is still some some prejudice there. I think it's getting much better. I think for all of us in the wine business, I'm sure you do agree, Christian and Peter, it has changed enormously in the last 20, 30 years. And look at the most incredible people coming out of the enology schools and what who are winemakers these days. It's changing, but there are still quite a bit of remnants of the old school.
Okay. Any other quick questions, Christian?
Not so far. We'll give a couple of more minutes here for questions to roll in. I have a personal question, if I could just ask. Can you tell us a little bit about the one family you didn't talk about, and that's your family and your wine empire? Talk to us a little bit about that, if you're willing.
Thank you, Christian. Well, first of all, we're on the right bank of Bordeaux, which means that our estates are necessarily small. If you think that the average size of a left bank property, so that's in the Médoc, would be about 40 hectares, that's about 90 acres. That is a fairly large estate. Le Pin, which is our most famous, is just over 2 hectares. And the average size on the right bank is about 4 hectares. So it's small. And small doesn't mean you have the same fighting power as you do from larger estates on the other side of a river. But for us, it's a huge advantage because it's like, Le Pin for us is like a vegetable garden. We can walk through it. We know the parcels, we know the soils, we know, we don't know the name of every vine, but we know it really well. And Le Pin is a fairy story. It's a fairy tale. My husband, Jacques, had a chance to buy the land when the Tiampon family, Jacques' uncle, who was running Vieux Château Serton, which is right next door, saw how good the estate was and wanted to buy this land. And the family refused. It was being sold in 1979 for 1 million French francs for the hectare, which is a lot of money at that time. Well, today, it's absolute peanuts. And they didn't want to buy it. So Jacques, who wasn't married at the time, said, it's a vegetable garden. I'd like to make wine. I'd like to start making wine. And that's how Le Pin was born. It's right next door to Vieux Château Serton. There are family members who are probably kind of regretting the fact that the family didn't invest in all those years ago in the estate. But it's really, we didn't realize what we had. And in some ways, we try not to realize what we have because it's a little jewel. And if we think about its reputation or its price or anything like that, we'd get so nervous we wouldn't even go out there and pick grapes anymore. But it's great fun, and being part of the Tiampon family has been quite a challenge. I'm British by origin, and so luckily I grew up speaking French. But coming in as an outsider was, I had to prove my worth. It's taken a lot of years, but it's quite a challenge. And now it's so rewarding because the next generation is working with us. And it's so wonderful to be working with the cousins or the nephews and nieces. And Peter mentioned that sense of transmission, of passing on to the next generation, of being just a link in a very long chain. And with a big family, which the Tiampon family is, you really feel that, especially when we've got weddings or funerals to go to. But being a link in a long chain is something that every one of us feels. And it's a challenge. I have to actually probably prove my worth more than other people. I also have to know when to step back because I wasn't born at Tiampon. But I'm full of admiration for my husband. I love making wines with him. And it's not always easy for some of you who do work with their other halves. It's not always easy, but we managed to go to bed not being angry with each other. So that's most important.
That's what my mother always used to say. And you have 2 sons as well. They're not in the business, but do you foresee that happening in the future?
People have different advices. The boys always come down. I don't think they've missed a harvest They've always taken them out to school for a long weekend, or they come down. They're both at university. One's doing law, the other's doing architecture and engineering. We have this idea that they should go off and do something else for 5 or so years when they graduate, make their mistakes elsewhere, travel the world, go and meet other inspiring people, and then they can come back and work with us in the wine business if they want to. Even if they don't work in the wine business, they will always be interested. They always taste with us. We taste a lot at home with family meals. We share a lot of the decisions with them. And we already have at each of our 3 domains that we own together, the next generation in place, who are just between us and the boys. So that's great, and I'm so proud of them. And they're all in there between sort of 30 and 40. The 3 people who run the estates there. So we have bought ourselves some time, but that was really important and took some time. The succession planning is complicated, and it doesn't matter whatever business you're in. The wine business is probably harder because you leave so much to chance for weather. It's all right putting your projections on the balance sheet and putting your forecasts together, but I mean, you can be wiped out by frost or hail or rot or whatever, and then it all goes out the window. And that's really when it's kind of hard sometimes to say to the family, you're not going to get a dividend in this year, or we're not going to make any wine this year. There are 2 vintages that Jacques took the decision not to make Le Pin at all, which was a huge hit. We could do that because it's just the family. If you've got 25 or 40 or however many shareholders in the family, that's a much more complicated decision to make.
Great. Well, we do have a question in the meantime for from the audience, the viewers. So Kim asks, if you could expand your book outside of Europe, what families would you want to interview?
Gosh, there's so many. I'd love. I mean, I think that I love a Zuccardi family. I think what they're doing in Chile is fantastic. Or the Catena family. I think that's extraordinary. I know well the Harlan family, and it's lovely to see how that's being passed on from one generation. I think the Henschkes up in the Barossa are extraordinary. I think it's fantastic. I think a family like the Michael Brakovich's family in New Zealand, who are refugees who came over and settled and making the most incredible wines, including one of the most extraordinary Chardonnays. And then, of course, there are parts of the world like China and Japan and Georgia, where those stories should be told. I mean, it's just amazing. Great wine can be made all over the world, and I think it's extraordinary. So hopefully, if this book sells as well as it does, my publisher, which is a project that Stephen Spurrier started, and it's a great publishing company, and I've been great for his support and that of Hugh Johnson as well. Hopefully, they might give me another mandate, and it would be extraordinary to be able to do that. So, watch this space.
It sounds like you've already got a plan in mind. In fact, I was going to ask you, sort of following up to that, let's say 10 years from now, you're going to write another book. And would you revisit the same properties that you wrote in this book to sort of check in and see how they're doing, just like you might go to your cellar and visit an older wine that's been resting there? Or would you write about something brand new? And, just like wine drinkers today always want the newest and the most exciting. What approach might you take?
Well, I think the great thing is about the 10 wine families is because of all the wine fairs and various events. I mean, that's how I got to know most of these people anyway, because we sort of tend to be at the same events, whether it's in Singapore, New York, San Francisco, Beijing, whatever, Tokyo. So we do see each other quite a lot. But I think that the new generation is probably going to be as compelling, if not more so. So I would love to see how the children of the people that I interviewed have taken over. That would be just fascinating to follow. And I think in many ways, a lot of the winemakers in Europe came of age in the 80s, and their fathers and their mothers were post-war generation where agriculture in Europe was all about using lots of fertilizer and lots of Roundup and lots of other things. And agriculture was not a very good place to be in the post-war years. I think what has been started by our generation has been fabulous. The move towards organics, the move towards sustainable agriculture, just thinking rather than following a spraying calendar that's given to you by a chemical company. And I think it's going to be taken even further by the next generation. And it's going to be really exciting to see that. So I would probably like to sort of follow up in some ways 10 years on. But then, I mean, who would have thought even 10 years ago that there'd be such exciting wines coming out of Japan or Georgia, or even some of the Chinese wines I've tasted recently are just extraordinary. And it's fabulous to go to somewhere like Patagonia and taste the wines down there, or up into Canada. And I'm humbled by some of the incredible wines that I tasted. I tasted a wine that Klaus-Peter Keller is making up in Norway. I mean, that is amazing. Great Riesling up in Norway. But I mean, watch this space. The wine world is changing so quickly.
Christian, if you wouldn't mind putting that picture of Fiona, it's such a lovely picture. And I don't think we've shown it yet, but if you could put that up there, and also let's check in to see if we have any other questions before maybe we bid adieu.
Okay.
But I do have, wanted to see if you can find that. There we go.
Yeah, that's me in full seller mode. Of course, I get to do all the sort of analysis, for the wines. And of course, the most emotional side is when the tanks are just bubbling away and you get to taste, or probably smell first, the newborn babies. It is pretty amazing to do. And I think however many years you've been making wine, however many vintages you've got under your belt, that is just such an experience. And we get butterflies in our stomach every time we do a new vintage. You don't get complacent. But that sense of pride when you do taste the newborn wine and you realize that it might just be okay, is amazing.
And I love I got the sense of humbleness in your husband, Jacques. You commented how he's somewhat bemused by the fact that so many people come and visit or want to drink your wine, and they think it's just this, thing that nobody can even imagine tasting, and it's, they put it on a very high pedestal. But he thinks it's wine. It's a product of nature, which I thought was really humbling.
Well, just remember, we're all farmers. I mean, we spend much more time in our jeans and our wellies, our boots, than we do in suits and and smart clothes pouring wines. And if you don't realize that nature is more powerful than we are, and can give you some lovely presents, but can also give you some horrible surprises, we are so small compared to nature that you have to be humble about it. And sometimes I think the same goes with great chefs, but with winemakers, you can believe some of the hype if you want to, but if you don't get home and realize that there's some graft to do, and you're just a farmer, you're not really going to survive in this business. You have to keep your feet on the ground.
Great. We do have one final question that we can take, and I'll put that up on screen here, and it's apropos for the times. And it says, do you see the impact of COVID-19 to those families in Europe? Will those families be more prepared for the pandemic as they run businesses in the long term? So I'm reading between the lines there, what are the impact on the wine industry in Europe, and are family businesses better prepared to deal?
Well, thank you for that question. That is actually from an MW student, so she's probably looking for advice on a paper 5 question next year.
I think, in spite of Bill Gates' warnings and any of the other warnings, this has all hit us with great surprise. And it's hit us full on, because we also sell a lot of wines to the restaurant business. And my heart goes out to all our sommelier and restaurant friends, because they are really suffering. And I just hope that, especially in the US, there's something that's done for them. But we've been really badly hit. In Europe, people collect wines, and a lot of people have been drinking our wines from their cellar. When we've had lovely spring weather, so everyone's out buying. If they're buying wines from supermarkets, they're buying rosé, because it's that sort of weather now. How can you plan for the future? It's really hard to say this, because there are so many businesses that survive from vintage to vintage, and again, my heart goes out to them. But if you can plan some sort of liquidity, some flexibility, you have to try and do that, because whether it's nature that's going to throw you a curved ball, or whether it's something like a pandemic like this, it's really hard to see, and we should be planning more. But it's so difficult when costs are high. With new laws, we may not be able to get the same labor out in our vineyards, whether it's Mexican labor in California or labor from Eastern Europe in Europe. There is really a huge financial risk that we take. And, for the great wine families, it pays off, but there are a lot of small people. We're on the top of the pinnacle, and we very much are aware of that. As to nowadays, working in the winery, it's difficult. There are a lot of wines that haven't been bottled yet, because it's kind of hard to keep the social distancing that we have in Europe, which is 1.5 meters to 2 meters when you're trying to run a bottling line. But the great thing is that there's a lot of work to be done out in the vineyards, and rows of vines are conveniently 1.5 meters spacing between them, so we can all work in the vineyards while respecting social distancing. But I think, like all of us in every business, we miss the one-to-one contact. I mean, hooray for Skype and Zoom and house party and all the rest of it. But a lot of what we do is brainstorming. And when we don't have that immediate contact, and we're not just walking, as I'd said to you earlier, some of the best conversations that we all have and the best ideas are walking through the vineyards together. It's tough. But financial planning is actually, and I hate to be so pedantic about it, but financial planning is going to actually be what saves us if we have a pandemic. And of course, let's all pray that we get a vaccine for this as soon as possible. And I would suggest that you drank lots of wine and not detergent or disinfectant to keep your health up.
Thank you. And let's also help the 2020 vintage is a blessing in disguise, and hopefully something good will come out of this year in the end. Fiona, I want to thank you so much. You have been absolutely a joy to talk with, and I understand you had a trip planned for come to Napa next month. Obviously, that has been postponed, but next time, let's have a glass together, and I'm going to go do that right now and finish reading your book. So,
I love that. Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you so much.
You.
And thank you all for listening in. And I do hope that you enjoy reading books and some of the stories, because they do tend to leap out of the page, and I hope you'll enjoy them.
Well, thank you so much to both of you. What an amazing interview and great knowledge that you shared, Fiona. Thank you. Make sure and seek out Fiona's book, 10 Great Wine Families of Europe, available on the Académie des Vins website. I'll post that link on our Facebook page and our website as well. There's a special promotion right now for viewers, so make sure and check check that out. A heartfelt thank you to you, Fiona, for your time today, and all the best in these trying times. Just a quick reminder that on Monday at 2:00 we have another round of wine trivia. Very popular from last week. We're bringing it back this week. This week's host will be Janet Campen. And we look forward to seeing you there. Get your minds ready for some more challenging questions. In the meantime, have a wonderful weekend. And thanks so much for watching. Cheers.